Guys, we're almost through this hellscape. I can see the light at the end of a... Oh wait, that's just Caustic Creative's garish lighting effects. Originally I had planned to make this the second last video, but I ended up having a surprisingly lot to say about the missile base, so that's going to need its own video. That, and it seems that despite a really long break in updates, Caustic Creative have not decided to simply let this project go and move on to something else. And I mean, honestly and unironically, I did think this mod had finally died for a long time. But then I saw more patch updates, and the comments on those updates that shocked me. So it's still alive, it's still eligible for vivisection. The show must go on. Also, while previously I've been showcasing the footage without any color correction or lighting adjustments, for this one I've corrected all of the footage simply because while I was trying to edit it, I noticed that the palette meant that I couldn't see what was going on most of the time. So please do not interpret this as a fix by Caustic Creative. It's all manual correction by me. Also, is this an awkward time to mention that Caustic Creative probably realized that this area was too dark and the palette too oppressive for anyone to see anything without adjustment during the development stage? I mean, I looked at their release trailer and they just kind of skip over everything with the undersea lab, except for one eye-burning glance at above ground section that mostly shows off the J.J. Abrams style lighting effects. Also, a brief reminder, at this point they've had 2 years to fix this. Instead, they've invented more alternative game modes and a new Statue of Liberty.
This line has been shut down by order of UNESCO.
Okay, in vanilla, this is an incredibly bleak looking area with a lot of water, a couple of security bots, and then a mix of buildings on stilts, buildings at water level, and a submerged submarine bay. There are 2 possibilities for this. Either Ion Storm did not invest a lot of time in the outside areas due to time and budget constraints, or this was supposed to be an isolated, easily overlooked, low-profile facility where Majestic 12 could perform horrific experiments without anyone ever suspecting.
I'd report this facility myself, but right now I need the job. Someone should expose what's going on here.
So naturally, Caustic Creative have made it a high-profile eyesore. There's a new floating platform that exists to make it easier for JC to infiltrate. A new side area with walls and a bunch of machinery to help JC get to the new platform, as well as a bunch of crap around the ground platform. And for some reason, this gatehouse at the front has a dead soldier in it. Just one though. I guess what must have happened is this guy was on his way to the military base, got lost, saw all this stuff and the lights and figured this must be the place. So he took up a spot in the front building. Then Tiffany Savage murdered him because she is a stone fox, all athletic and fearless in that tight costume and anyway. Honestly, I feel like this, the trucks parked around the area, the dead soldier, the storage containers, etc. all create these weird fractured interpretation of a base that once had a clear purpose and ownership. Like, was this meant to be a military base now, or is it just an MJ-12 base like it always was? So, let's talk about their additions and alterations. In this case, the key alteration around which most of the others are built is a wall with a gate, which in the second last chapter of the game demonstrates Caustic Creative experimenting with the idea of providing a variety of solutions. So let's have a look at some of their ideas. Remember how in Paris area there's that tunnel that lets you bypass literally all the patrols and all the security? Also, remember how Caustic Creative seem to have been throwing rebreathers around levels where they are of no use whatsoever? Remember how on Liberty Island they included a rebreather as a fuck you to anyone who invested points in the swimming skill? Well, in this level, they've added a tunnel, which is basically where you'd assume you're supposed to use all those spare rebreathers. Well, presumably. Reality is you only take about 25 hit points damage total. Or at least that's what I did using swimming untrained with no rebreather, no augs, and no real amount of prep or rehearsal. Anyway, it's really hard to find and ultimately a disappointment to use. This is kind of a shame because, as I discovered, it looks like they're starting to realize there's a virtue to the multiple solutions approach. This particular one seems to be for no skills and no augs. So what you've got to do is see this forklift, then realize it's a rehash of the puzzle from the Liberty Island storage area. Get up into this pitch black section of crates so you can drop down into this tunnel. Or if you have the strength org, you can just throw aside the steel crates and go around the side, but why waste bioenergy? Then you need to swim to this point, all well lit, then swim under the water through a dark tunnel that has an oddly well lit area at the end. And this seems to exist exclusively to let JC Denton get to this hatch, which is locked, but leads to a very similar location. On the other side of the wall. That's right, you do all of this and it's allowed you to get past a fence to go from here to here, provided you have the skills / lockpicks and a rebreather. It is a lot easier to subvert this via a speed org, or maybe use the strength org to drag crates out to make stairs, or maybe just like sneak around in the other new area we'll get to in a bit. But I need to stress here, this is not a sewer. This is not a storm drain. None of the entrances are connected to a gutter. It's just a well-lit tunnel that has 2 entrance points in really convoluted locations. And I'd also like you to remember that the sewer tunnel and the gas station, they deliberately took the lighting out of that. But oh well, moving on. This new area is just off to the right of the wall. It's a collection of like fuel tanks, some machinery, a signal tower, etc. Patrolled by a security bot with this building at the end. It exists purely to add a step getting into the ocean. The building has a locked door, which sometimes will get opened by the technician inside, but it also has an unlocked hatch on the top, accessible by this ladder that exists in pure darkness. Then a vent out of a room with no doors, and perfect sneak up angle on the technician. All of this, except for the technician, is indestructible. Just trust me, it is, okay? I'm not going to give this poor bastard again. So, once you're in the room, the only way the bot can attack you, and you can attack the bot, is through this clipping arrow section. So, with the combination of locked door, blast-proof glass, security camera, and patrolling pod, this building that contains only a gate switch is locked down tight. Except for this unprotected ladder and unlocked hatch. If only Majestic 12 had a means to prevent randoms from just using ladders. But wait, what's this over to the side? That's right, a barrier to prevent ladder climbing is here on this signal tower platform. But why would they do that? Well, it's because if you could easily get up there, then you wouldn't need to deal with their weird platform crane thing to get onto the wall and then into the water. And then onto the extra platform, which has a mysterious ladder at the back for just this. Reminder, Majestic 12 is supposed to be some of humanity's greatest minds. So yeah, the obvious non-diegetic reason is to give the player some sort of problem to invest in the solution of, and then feel good when they fix it. But when doing that, it's generally considered a good idea to try to at least make it consistent with the surroundings in a game. Particularly if the game is one noted for being the one that started the whole immersive sim genre. Obviously some inconsistencies are inevitable, but these could all have been fixed by just looking at what they'd actually created, like adding a locked door in between rooms, and shifting the approach to the roof of one of climbing boxes, or using a forklift if you're determined to one of those. Want to be super advanced? Put another platform crane there and put the code on a nearby data pad. That way you have a guide to how to use the other one, and that means that it stops becoming easily mistakable for an immobile prop. Also, maybe check for clipping errors and don't use indestructible glass so often. There's a turret on top of an unmovable crate, and it has these alarm trip lasers that were smart enough to detect whether the object passing through them is a Majestic 12 guard or a hostile. Well, probably it just only detects if the object blocking the beam is the one and only JC Denton. I didn't bother testing. This is interesting given that around the time of release, Caustic Creative's stance was that maybe they'd look into stopping flies setting off trip lasers. But apparently they'd engineered this simply because it wasn't worth the effort to work out a way to get a laser trip set up and a patrolling guard without breaking the established rules. I mean, the AI for Deus Ex was state of the art in 2000, but it's not terribly complex or sophisticated by modern standards. Generally speaking, it requires as much help as it can get in order to be both presenting credible characters and a credible threat. Keep in mind, they also added an easy means to bypass this, rather than requiring an exploit like traditionally speedrunners have employed. On top of that, it is a really bad idea to break your game's own rules for no reason this late in the game. It does start to raise questions in people's minds about whether they misunderstood the rules, or what else has been changed without notice. Also, for any of you typing that Majestic 12 probably have the technology to set up a laser tripwire that somehow senses who is walking through it. They already have the technology to achieve the same effect much cheaper and much more effectively. The Deus Ex security camera. So, as well as those features, the new design also includes a few extra options for players wanting to have some fun. You can lob 20mm rounds at the guys on the race platform, essentially using artillery strikes on these guards, as the indestructible glass barriers and the exposed corners make them helpless to effectively retaliate or protect themselves. You can ride on the back of these flak cannons and admire how you spend so much time aimed at the base or the cliff walls. Also how, because of the physics engines, you change location but not facing. You can troll the new security bot and laugh at it as it tries to work out how to shoot at you through indestructible glass, or troll it into getting stuck on the platform because of the pathfinding and the level designing never anticipated it leaving its patrol to this extent. Once we're in the undersea base, it becomes obvious that there were three major sources of inspiration for this area: the System Shock games, the BioShock games, and the 1995 movie Casino.
Visit this Maxwell. These are hidden. These are our best machines. They bring all the action.
Story goes that originally this section was going to be a moon base where you must overcome a hostile AI, but that was repurposed to an undersea base due to time constraints. Personally, I'm of the opinion that other factors may have been similarities to games already made by Warren Spector, and that it had a recent sequel. Now, the plot of this is supposed to be that Majestic 12 had a staff member go a little nuts, completely independently of Tiffany planning to raid the place. He claims to be an Illuminati loyalist, and he basically releases a virus into the system that would kill everyone and destroy Majestic 12's investment in this undersea base. Whether she knows about this or not, Tiffany refuses to go back to the base and make a try for the undersea lab. She's a smart girl. JC is not so bright. He'll wander into a death trap without complaint or second thought because someone told him to go get a thing. Anyway, Caustic Creative have chosen to reflect this mayhem, uncertainty and isolation by having email notifications floating above random computers, adding more monitor decorations, and all these other decorations that are largely confusing and kind of detrimental to the feeling of this being a slowly collapsing research base. Like, maybe if the holograms look corrupted by the virus in the system, or they were propaganda by the loyalist guy, or something like that, it would make sense. But in this context, it just makes it look like the place got a whole lot of email and nobody wants to answer it. Speaking of pointless decoration, now there's this poorly worded menu option available that swaps out the rotating Deus Ex logo with a panning or static shot of the level you last played saved at. That's right. Not content with simply removing the title and the actual game and plastering their own credits all over the intro cutscene, they now want to erase the logo and replace it with more of their level design. This strikes me as particularly poor choice for a game that's all about conspiracies and making the player deal with twists and turns because, well, if you didn't already know the plot of the subbase, and you were at the submarine base above the ocean, you died, you came back to this menu, you're about to get some spoilers. There's this room where they've added more greasels, but then they've remembered that they want you to be able to get through without killing them yourself. Remember, silent assassin kills do not count. So they've added a security bot you can order to do that for you. Once it's done, you'll quickly discover that they never got around to actually mapping a patrol pattern for it at all. It's literally just there to shoot some greasels. See, if you want to create a masterpiece where the little details matter, you actually have to pay attention to all the details, not just toss in a few gimmicks and high definition textures. But it appears that they almost knew this. Almost. If you've activated the bot, on your way out you'll find it's been disabled, presumably by Walton or his minions. That'd be a nice touch, except there's no enemies in this room to demo it, and later in this other room, the turret I hacked, it was still going, and it was my buddy, there was the soldier here in the scuba suit, shot the shit out of him. Did these guys just disable one thing on the way through? I mean, were they professionals disabling security as they went or not? Are these supposed to be a professional crew handpicked by Walton himself, or just a bunch of random conscripts with scuba gear and lambs? Let's talk about the Bioshock influence. It appears here Caustic Creative started experimenting a little more with creating dramatic scenes via scripted events. It's a pretty common trend used in immersive sims and other games looking to create a tense atmosphere. However, credibility does hinge on the scenario appearing to happen completely independently of the player. There's a couple of spots where you'll be approaching an area and a monster like a Karkian will charge, full pelt, over to eat a corpse. The idea is obviously to create a mix of shock and relief and urgency, and that you realise the scariest monster was just there. But just in time, it noticed a corpse, and now you have an opportunity to get in and out without having to confront it. However, the fact it happens so clearly in response to the player arriving creates the unmistakable feeling that you're not wandering around in isolation with monsters potentially anywhere ready to spring on you. It just lets you know that you're in a video game with scripted events. Worse, since this mod is loaded up with a staggering number of achievements, it starts to feel like these are in there simply to meet some sort of arbitrary criteria or expectation of the player. For things like this to work, you need to factor in the strengths and weaknesses of your engine and premise. In this case, the crippling weakness is that since the Karkians will eat the corpse in their existence in a set time, they couldn't just leave it as an ongoing setup, and that left them with the problem of how to make it dramatic. Personally, I think they would have been better off with going with a shorter distance or another scripted event that makes the corpse fall down. Like, I don't know, a piece of scenery falling apart. So in vanilla, there is this area that appears to be an expansion in progress, even though it's directly between the entrance area and the barracks. It didn't make a lot of sense with its location in vanilla, but it provided a nice arena for a duel later. Caustic Creative did this weird thing where it's still being excavated now, but it's also been partially constructed, and it seems like they tossed up some wall and a ceiling bit and just left it. They also added a side area which appears to be a self-contained lab that is mostly just there to house the key that you'll need to unlock the door, because now the door is locked. And they also included like this set of bones just sitting in the excavation area. Like, everything else indicates that it's only very recently went to shit down here, but there's this pile of bones here. Is this supposed to be some guy who got eaten by greasels? Or is it just a guy they found while digging? Is this part of an Atlantis conspiracy? That would be amazing! Let me investigate that. No, it's just bones. Ultimately, there's just a lot of extra dark space and a lot of walls, which I'll get into what these do later. Suffice to say, they are counterproductive to the overall goal of the area and the player experience. So the area outside of the Universal Constructor Labs has been expanded. Well, they've redesigned it and added some extra areas and bits and pieces. Aesthetically, most of their design is kind of predictable. But aside from that, it has some ridiculous controls. See, I don't think Caustic Creative remember this is a game when they make their design decisions, or just their basic product design decisions. See, door controls are generally on their own, so you can find them easily and don't mistake them for anything or anything for them.
I'll hold it for a while.
Quick, we've got to get across. Find the controls that extend the bridge.
I think I just blasted it.
This is just asking for disaster if you're distracted on your way in. Particularly since vanilla doesn't even have doors here. They're just like doorways you can walk through. So, like, WTF, mates? Then there's this control label, which proposes that it is both super important and you have time to wait to see it scrolling across. Can you hear that? That is the sound of ultimate suffering for a UI designer. Aside from that, it mostly seems that they've decided to move the majority of the facility into this area, break rooms, the surgery, etc. So it both locks out everyone who does not absolutely need to be there, but also places everything that everyone needs in it. for some reason. The Universal Constructor itself is in this room, which is, in essence, the polar opposite of the original design. The utilitarian design of vanilla is replaced with this grandiose temple to this device, which includes a panel with more monitors than any human could track, and a couple of toys? This overly grand design seems particularly out of place when you consider that a major plot point is Majestic 12 is on a quest to create the ultimate artificial intelligence slave. One so powerful that it can operate the Universal Constructor to its fullest potential alone. Not one that instructs a staff of people who play with toys to operate the Universal Constructor and look at monitors. Bob Page's ultimate vision is to meld with this being and become a god who need not depend upon lesser beings such as his servants in Majestic 12. Everything and everyone is a tool towards this purpose, and the only temporals he is interested in are the ones to himself. To him, this miracle of science is not majestic. It's just another tool in the box. All this grandeur and decoration is ultimately a spectacular waste of resources from the perspective of Majestic 12. And nobody who matters to their institution will visit this place. The whole point of this facility is that it's tucked away where nobody would go. Nobody would find it. Perfect place to test dangerous new nanotech. Once again, the inescapable conclusion in revision is that this facility doesn't belong in the world of Deus Ex. It wasn't created by Majestic 12. It was created by Caustic Creative exclusively for the purpose of a visit by JC Denton. This is particularly disappointing in a Deus Ex mod that claims fidelity, given that it ultimately undercuts the entire focus and feel of the original game. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the actual creative team should not leave their mark, but rather that the mark needs to be incorporated as a signature or a compromise to gameplay, not a massive, high-profile paint-over.
If you recall our chat in
Of course, once we do all this and listen to Bob Page brag about how he can make Grey Death 2.0 by looking at a maths textbook,
do you have any idea how easy it will be for me to make a new virus? All I have to do is find a very large prime number and multiply.
and in this version JC looks ridiculously sunburned, then we have to fight Walt Disney. This never really made sense from a narrative perspective, but it was there to provide the satisfying showdown between you and this pompous arsehole who thinks he's all that in a box of crackers too.
You can't take me, JC. I've seen your specs.
So, how does it go on medium difficulty? Well, sometimes it looks like this.
Then this will be with the stupid young rebel.
Now, that doesn't happen every time. For example, sometimes when I play, it goes like this.
If you recall.
And for someone with a GEP gun and maxed out heavy, it might go like this. Or if you have a plasma gun and maxed out heavy, it might go like this. Pretty much anything other than a heavy weapon though, and you're at an astounding disadvantage. Though probably greatly diminished if you maxed out the energy shield orc, which I did not do. It appears Caustic Creative realized this since they put a flamethrower in the excavation area. Just lying around there in case you need it. Now, Simmons has always been a tough threat and is immune to a lot of these attacks. He's supposed to be more upgraded but less experienced version of JC. After all, he's been behind a desk and had bodyguards his whole career. He also used to be set up so it was more satisfying to fight and harder to cheese. The first issue is that rather ambush you from the side, like the manipulative little shit who depends on the Majestic 12, now in Revision he meets you head on, which automatically makes it hard to evade him. You literally have to run right at him to begin with, and he has a period of pre-programmed action where he runs right into whatever you launch at him. It's basically a case where Iron Storm deliberately set up an approach rather than the obvious option, so Caustic Creative put the problems back in by going with the obvious option. The vanilla setup meant JC and Walton had lots of room to move any which way they wanted, so it provided the essentials for a fair fight. Walton has some immunities you don't, but he doesn't have the weapons to exploit that anyway, and you have an ability to freeze time to use health packs, etc. that Walton does not. Walton has two powerful weapons, you have whatever you are carrying. All these bits of pointless wall in the excavation zone actually kind of create this sort of kill zone for Walton. You're bottled in here. You can only run back into a dark corridor where you will have the massive disadvantage due to the plasma rifle shotgun effect. The only winning move would be not to go into the sea base in the first place.
You aren't going in there.
Yeah, I'm going in there. So are you.
Why am I going in there?
Why? To protect me.
There is no protection there. If it's come out, we're fishing a barrel. What are you doing? Why do they want you in there? What are you, crazy?
You know, you think too hard.
Nobody ever told me that before. But I wouldn't go in there.
This is particularly bad since Walton was designed for prolonged conflict. He has two weapons that will eventually start to use his augmentations to go all predator on you. He also has voice lines for where he loses track of where you are.
If that's you, Denton, just come on out.
So, like, really, the best design would be to make it more engaging would have been to draw it out by, say, setting him up so he arrives with many obstacles between him and JC Denton. After all, the narrative explanation is supposed to be that he arrives at the last minute trying to stop you, not that Bob Page set up this entire plan, including the design and eventual loss of his undersea facilities so Walton could ambush you. The second major issue is this heavily incentivizes the player to simply cheese it by either shooting Walton on sight with a heavy weapon or setting up a grenade trap. I should also stress, shooting Walton right away isn't any sort of in-character response or emergent gameplay. It's just a basic exploit of a script that will lock him into running forward until an attack breaks the script. Your only other option is just save scumming, then running to the right and hope that you get lucky and don't get instantly headshot. It looks like they've beefed up his hit points, his weapons, and have given him automated defense against missiles and explosives because it appears on this image. A lot of good it does him. In other words, this was an objective step backwards in design and was to gain balance what the Gep gun is to Walton Simmons. It seems that literally every wide-spanning mod for Deus Ex feels the need to crank up the power of the plasma rifle, Or at least they have since this forum post was made in November of 2012. That's 12 years after the game was released, where someone claims they discovered a bug. This is part of a bigger problem among mod communities where there is an assumption that there is a perfect version of the game that could have been if something hadn't gotten in the way. But the reality is once you reach a certain level, you hit a zero-sum game. If you keep going after that, you start creating problems. While I completely understand why some people have been frustrated that the prototype plasma rifle in the game, which is critical of placing too much faith in technology, was not the ultimate weapon, I feel that the missing line warrants a second examination. I mean, sure, it's possible that during a patch a programmer accidentally deleted a line of code that changed the single-player version to match the multiplayer version, which had to be balanced for competitive play. Or it's also possible that to test how well using the multiplayer stats would be for both modes, they removed an easily replaceable line of code, then left it there when they liked the outcome. The less effective plasma rifle does kind of diminish the epic power fantasy of blasting enemies away. It also lets you avoid being one-shotted by Walton Simon. Given that this game was supposed to be play how you want, and that Warren Spector has made no secret at all that he didn't approve of sort of like, you know, mass destruction power fantasies, well...
The other thing I wanted to do, I was kind of tired of games where you would kill everything that moves, and what the game would do was it would pat you on the back and say, good job. You know, if you pull a gun, unless it's a GEP gun, obviously, but if you pull a gun and start shooting, in most circumstances, that's the biggest moment of your life, and I wanted you to feel that weight. And
Did you notice how I didn't use the GEP gun then?
I really appreciate that.
He didn't approve of them being the standard. It seems that it would have been a better outcome for everyone that the prototype plasma rifle not be excessively powerful.
But if you pull a gun and start shooting, in most circumstances, that's the biggest moment of your life, and I wanted you to feel that weight.
Particularly since the combination of being a heavy weapon, firing multiple projectiles that have damage on impact, then area effect damage on top of that, means you have a shitload of factors to consider when balancing it. As a side note, I was tempted to unpack all the expansion and dig through the code and stuff, but honestly, by the time this video goes live, they'll probably have patched again. In fact, I know they had because I waited that long until I got to this point, and it'll probably be one of those sneaky changes if I bring it up. Like when they took away Milton's coffee cup. Guys, I miss Coffee Milton so much. He was my hero. Of course, there were some opportunities for actual revision that follows the values espoused by Costa Creative. Just as usual, though, they were less exciting and or would have really required some seasoned pros to do some really difficult tricks, and were hence well beyond a team with no experience doing their very first mod. Anyway, let's have a look at them. So Walton is a memorable moment in the game, so we can't really remove him, but the better idea would have been to actually give him some options. Set him up so that neither party gets a cheap shot, and look for ways to drag the encounter out. He's really much more engaging and impressive if he's using his augmentations, talking shit and making you keep track of where he's going than he is when he's just using his plasma gun to turn you into a thin mist the moment you make a mistake or get unlucky. No, don't get me wrong, this would have been hard as shit. If it was straightforward, Ion Storm team would have done it. But it would also have been a very interesting project in level design and creating a level to allow the AI to get the best value out of the game. It could also have used a reason to go into the excavation anyway. See, in the original, it's kind of implied that the reason you have to go through the excavation area is the base is going batshit, and the changes have forced you to go that way. But there's very little to that beyond talking about sealed doors and swimming through waterlogged areas earlier. If you're the kind of people who like a nice cinematic, it would have been a great opportunity to show something sealing off what normally would be the obvious route. Perhaps a malfunctioning turret shooting out a window, a lab exploding, a malfunctioning sub being driven by a fleeing scientist crashing into the base, whatever. Something that make it feel like this is an alternative route and not just a really weirdly designed base. I mean, it'd be a shitload of work involved, but it seems to be the sort of thing that would be satisfying if you like making aesthetic set pieces and then putting them as the background on your menus. So they've added a bunch of rooms in the main lab that are basically the kind of recreation rooms that I suspect Caustic Creative would like to have in their workplaces. Except, I hope that if they're working in a top secret science lab, they would not need a chart explaining science scams to them. Anyway, what they don't have is bathrooms, pantries, kitchens, monitoring stations, biohazard quarantine, air recycling centers, power stations, server farms, garbage disposals, and all that good stuff. This isn't glamorous stuff, but it's all the things that you can use to tell us about Majestic 12 in the same way the tiny living quarters do. Garbage disposal would be the perfect place to stash some bones. Monitoring station, perfect place for a wall of monitors. Due to asset and budget limitations, we never see much of what Majestic 12 was capable of in vanilla. So an obvious focus for revision of these kinds of levels would be showcasing the technology and the philosophy of Majestic 12. They have technology capable of rebuilding and protecting millions of lives, and they ruthlessly use it to destroy nations instead. They could save millions, but would rather kill billions in order to cement their power and benefits. Some visual representations of this would have been pretty awesome. As with Vandenberg and the gas station, there was a lot of potential here to show longer-term history for the residents. What kind of entertainment do these guys like? Just darts? Any of them doing the nasty with each other on the sly? Do any of them really hate each other's guts and try to sabotage careers, comfort, etc.? I mean, the overwhelming focus of this game is to get you to weigh your choices and make you consider what solution you want to come up with at the end. Hence why they had so many moments showcasing minor characters as people with conflicting priorities who we can empathize with and who have lives outside of the game. That way we feel bad when we kill them. Maybe. This was the perfect opportunity to show what Majestic 12 does to people when it uses them as a resource, and how that impacts them, and raise the question whether the Illuminati would continue to do this after the Majestic 12 fell. Didn't happen. Okay, well, there's two techniques that I would have really recommended that Caustic Creative go through prior to committing to all this redevelopment. One of which I think they already do, but not productively, and the other of which I think is rather overlooked by lots of video game developers as well as modders. The first one is color theory. For something that usually gets taught in high school art classes, this is a really often overlooked technique that has a ton of applications in video games, particularly exploratory games. You can use colors to set a mood, signal aspects, and guide the player towards an important location or information. For example, you have a room that's supposed to have a universal constructor, and the controls as well, but the UC is supposed to be the centerpiece, the controls being off to the side, and maybe some other stuff as well in there. Okay, as it is, I know exactly where you're looking, over here, where the color pops out. Suppose you want them to look elsewhere though, like to the controls, but you don't want to rearrange the room and build the room around the control section. Lighting and colors can help you. First thing, you want to prioritize where people look. Make it bright. People will look where they can see what they're looking at. So, where you don't want them to look, make it dark. So you decommission some of these lights. Second thing you want to consider is doing, particularly in a purple dominated area, is use yellow. So one obvious ploy we can use, since this is a facility run by Bob Page and not Elon Musk, is some yellow safety lines. There's no real need for it, but yellow will catch the other player, and hey, this is special, but also fits in with the general idea. People would expect some safety stuff in an industrial area. It would also be like the ideal place to add some of this orange glow that Caustic Creative felt the need to saturate early levels with. Now, this kind of thing does require some training in composing artwork, but some concept prep like this can save you hours and hours of trying to assemble rooms, then playtesting them. Which is why studios employ concepts artists and tend to sketch out concepts for rooms as well as characters well in advance. The other kind of thing they could do is role-playing. This is one that I would have thought would have come naturally to Caustic Creative, since they seem to build like inaccessible apartments that seem to be where they'd like to live. It's one I feel the original developers probably used in, say, The Mansion, given that the main character of that level is the building itself. That is, it's basically when you build a space like this that is supposed to have a functioning area, rough it out first, then wander around with the enemies disabled and just imagine how you'd move around in it and what sort of things you'd have to do. Like, okay, I'm working in the lab and I get hungry. Do I have a break room where I can hang out for a long time because my boss wants me to be refreshed? Or do I have to go spend my money in the vending machine owned by my boss and then go eat at my desk? Bathrooms nearby to save time, or centralized to save space? Once I'm done eating and I've washed my hands, there's a terrible accident in the lab. The khaki and urine container exploded and it made the nanobots eat one of my arms. What happens? Where's the medbay? Probably not up near the offices like it was in your school, particularly if you may be dealing with quarantine measures for khaki and urine crazed nanobots. It's also probably going to be less desks, more cells, or at least if the desks there, they're probably going to be full of emails about weird accidents, diseases, etc. These kinds of details aren't as flashy as lighting effects or rotating transparent image assets, but they create that sense of a world that Deus Ex is famous for, well, before Human Revolution. That is to say, a world that's lived in, where actual living happens. Characters are characters. Plus, it's actually kind of fun. It's like why people still play pen and paper RPGs, and why so many people who do just create characters and areas and maps that they're never going to actually use. It's fun. So what have Caustic Creative been up to while I've been working on this? Okay, well, I guess there's probably a fun story behind why this MIB got made immortal in the first place. My guess is about trying to prevent players from taking him out before he can deliver a speech, to which I say, you can't mod out cheap strats. You just end up making players resort to even cheaper strats. Seriously, if players are doing that kind of thing, it means they want to play that way rather than the correct way. Warren himself has some key words to say on that.
But then, once people buy your game, it's their game, so you can't be too upset about that.
And yes, I'm aware the immortal switch is there because they used it in the original to stop you killing a particular NPC before they could do something mission critical, but there is no way that this MIB was plot critical. This one is kind of interesting because in the actual credits, they don't mention the Vanilla Matters mod at all. Just the creator as creating the inventory switching system. Like they were recruited for the mod as a contractor and not like a modder on their own project. Like, they mention it in the update that it's lifted directly from his mod, but don't mention the mod in the credits. Seems like kind of a dick move. Also, I feel by far the biggest issue is, despite my thoroughly documented, highly respectful review of the revision mod, which I know Caustic Creative are watching, I know it. Apparently the priorities are fixing things like this tree, to the extent they're apparently willing to spend money on it. Let's have a look at this tree. Guys, I promise you, no amount of remodeling these trees will fix your mod. Please let it die and move on. It's what's best for everyone, especially for you guys. There are so many better things you could be working on. Do as I say, not as I do. Also, don't believe me? Listen. Can you hear that? Can you hear it? That is the sound of validation. And honestly, nothing you do will ever convince the fan base, I cannot air quote that enough, to stop coming up with ridiculous ideas that they somehow think that you guys should be working on. Like this one.
No, God!
You somehow think God, that you guys should be working on. No! Like this one.
No! No!
But anyway, I'll probably get around to finishing the last few videos once I get the chance, depending on how real life goes and, well, how ambitious I get in trying to make them. We'll just have to see, you know, real life in that. If you do want to discuss anything that came up in this or any of the other videos, my friend runs a Discord, largely for discussing immersive type sim games like Deus Ex and the variants and copies around. So, link in the doobly-doo. Do consider dropping in and sharing your opinions. Or just sharing your opinions if you're already lurking in there. You know who you are.